video game developers, specifically a change in developer, whether it be a change in the people who work in the studio or a change in developers who make a game. Because recently when Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater came out, many people enjoy it and think it's a very good one-to-one remake, although it has some changes and improvements to the gameplay. But one thing I saw was people being surprised that Konami is using Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater as a way to train new employees in the hopes of making new Metal Gear Solid titles. And while many don't want that for narrative reasons for the franchise, other people made the claim that Metal Gear Solid wouldn't work without Hideo Kojima. Ghost Babel, Twin Snakes, Portable Ops, Acid Warden 2, what are y'all talking about? Like, that example is just a weird case of people being like, well, it can't work with the main person behind it, and it's like, it's worked before in the past. Guys, I get the idea of hesitating on the idea of Konami making a new Metal Gear Solid without Kojima's input nowadays, but trying to act as if it couldn't possibly work feels baffling when you're also playing a remake that is made by new employees who aren't Kojima Productions or Hideo Kojima himself. So, what are we exactly doing here with this? Or people who also made like the most recent Master Collection port as well, where they too had to know how the games work or even port them correctly, because ports can be completely botched if things go wrong. Another Konami series that had this complaint would also be the Silent Hill franchise. It had Silent Hill 1, but in Silent Hill 2, they formed Team Silent and made Silent Hills 2, 3, and 4. Where then on, people then will constantly mention how Konami would just keep throwing the IP at random developers, whether it be Silent Hill Origins with Climax Studios, Silent Hill Homecoming with Double Helix Games, Silent Hill Shattered Memories, also Climax Studios, Silent Hill Downpour with Vatra Games, Silent Hill Book of Memories with Way Forward, PT, which was Kojima Productions, but that one people that clapped for, Silent Hill The Short Message, that was RC made eternally at Konami Digital Entertainment, and most recently with Silent Hill F, once again, people clapped for before the game even came out, despite the fact it followed the history of feel like random developers being thrown at it. Granted, the reason people clapped Silent Hill F was specifically, and only for the writer, being Ryukishi07, who already had notoriety with other stuff, so people generally felt the writing was in good hands. Even though for the other games, people constantly complained with new developers, and this one too, considering Silent Hill F was made by Neo Barge Entertainment, with all I can find on the studio being that they co-developed some other studios like ports and collections, but that's about it. They weren't exactly a big studio yet or really known for anything, so this was a big project for them, a new entry in Silent Hill, which based on reception, people thought worked out really well. But it's weird how this one, Neo Barge Entertainment basically got the benefit of the doubt solely because they had Ryukishi07 on board, but every other one people complain, oh, the new studio gonna ruin Silent Hill and everything awful, except for PT, which granted, we know about PT when the teaser ends, you see Kojima Productions, Hideo Kojima, and Guillermo del Toro involved, where people had high hopes for it, but that's because people liked PT itself, so they had high hopes for it on top of who was working on it. But every other thing, people would just say, they're just picking any random developer and throwing Silent Hill IP at them like it means nothing to Konami. Meanwhile, Silent Hill F could be accused of the same thing with Neo Barge Entertainment, but I don't even see anyone even bring up the developers of Silent Hill F, period. Another big case is also Rare, where people constantly to this day bring up as if Microsoft should essentially give Rare over to Nintendo. That's not how that works, but people constantly do that because they associate Rare with Nintendo solely because of the Super Nintendo 64 era of games when they were essentially a second-party developer before Microsoft then outright purchased Rare. But it's weird because at this point, many of the people that, for the games people like with Rare, when it comes to, their platformers and stuff, whether it be the people made Banjo-Kazooie, made Dark Old Country games, or stuff like that people generally cite, have already moved on and made their own studio Playtonic with Yooka-Laylee. So it's weird that people act as if Rare will, to this day, is the same company as it was back then, when it isn't. And then also the fact that the Banjo-Kazooie successor, Yooka-Laylee, that got crowdfunded, was generally met with mixed reception, but people love the Dangerous Lair, with Yooka-Laylee, the original main game, going to be getting a remaster that I think by this point this video had already come out. But it's one of those things where the game that people see like they would have wanted ended up not being up to what they expected despite having the team they wanted involved. And some people feel as if the Rare nowadays who make stuff like Sea of Thieves are still the same studio, as if they're the same people that worked on Rare back in the day. Sure, some of the people there may still be the same, but not as if they're going to suddenly switch entirely if Nintendo owns them, especially when Nintendo doesn't even use a lot of their own developers in that way. I mean, when's the last thing I got Golden Sun? The answer? The DS era. But now they said they make the Mario sports games, which I'll see people call Nintendo out for doing, even though it could just be the developers wanting something different, and that's good on them. A big one to me is the fact that people still have their hopes that Mega Man Legends 3 will come out. Even though for many years in Capcom, Keiji Inafune, whether it be listed as producer, character designer, or whatever, executive producer, had a hand on many Capcom projects for many years before eventually departing the company, with some developers like Hideo Kamiya claiming that he was a businessman and, well, he had a lot of stuff, a lot of projects. But one of those things mentioned is Mega Man Legends 3, where Legends 1, he mentioned how, Inafune mentioned specifically that Legends failed due to the fact that he got arrogant, and despite Legends being beloved by a lot of people, including me, my favorite sub-series Mega Man, is the one that generally performed the worst when it came to it. But many people still have hopes that Legends 3 will happen, especially since there was a concept of it that ended up cancelled. But it's one of those things where, with how much Capcom has changed without Inafune, how different would a Mega Man Legends 3 be nowadays? Like, how much will have changed when it comes to Mega Man Legends 3? The only new Mega Man project we've gotten since then, as a new thing, would be Mega Man X Dive, which was handled by a different studio entirely, it's not Capcom, and Mega Man 11, which was pretty great. But it's one of those things where many people want a canceled game to be finished and come out, but with how long things have changed, it would be a different team, different people helming it, so it makes you wonder how much different would a project be if it were to be resurrected, and how much would it be now, back then, if it was actually still made when it was at its height with the original developers involved, kind of thing. I know nowadays people don't really like Keiji Inafune for a variety of reasons, but it is one of those things where it makes you wonder, what would it look like nowadays? Similar to how Dead Rising had changed, where before it was Capcom Japan made Dead Rising 1, then it was Capcom Japan, Blue Castle Games, then it became Capcom Vancouver, who was Blue Castle Games and Dead Rising 3, and they brought in some people from, I believe, EA to help helm Dead Rising 4, which ended up not doing well, but also highlight how people saw those developers from EA as a scapegoat, which is also the thing. People who see the big names, or let's say director or producer for a project, and just scapegoat them as the sole reason why a game doesn't do well as well. Where people get big fame, big notoriety as being this big face or something, but it may also be the people get the target, even if maybe it's not their fault. We don't know. We don't know what happened behind the scenes and everything. So it's one of those things where maybe those people try to salvage a project and everything. So, very complicated thing. When it comes to like canceled projects, typically, makes you wonder how different things become. Like Metroid Dread, which ended up getting done by Mercury Steam, and probably looks way different than whatever Metroid Dread was years ago, if it even was a thing. Because where some people say that Metroid Dread wasn't even actually a thing years ago, it was more of just a gag mentioned within like Metroid Prime, so we'll say like with a DS game. I don't know. But either way, it probably looks very different than what it could have looked back then. And speaking of Castlevania, back to another Konami IP, is also when Castlevania shifted from a side-scrolling level-based platformer to instead turning into the Metroidvania franchise that many associate it with, where I know back then reviewers bashed the game's visuals because how dare the game be 2D, how awful. But it's one of those things where its whole entire thing shifted, and despite Koji Igarashi being a programmer saving the night, he ended up becoming the producer for the franchise for so many different entries, to the point where people started also nicknaming those entries Igavania, until eventually the Lords of Shadow titles started having a Mercury Steam, where then people started getting mad that a new developer was helming things, even though things had changed considerably for Castlevania by that point already. So why is it now with Mercury Steam? I know the answer to the kid that I ended up finding is probably because of the fact that there was an announcement of a freaking Symphony of the Night 2, and then it didn't happen, or the fact that people didn't want to reboot, period, so less so developers, and more so the idea, even Lords of Shadow ended up being the best-selling title to this franchise, to this day apparently. So it's one of those things where people, from what I've seen, didn't really complain about a shift in developers or who was in charge, everything, until Mercury Steam, and people still get mad about Mercury Steam to this day. There are people who thought Metroid Dread wouldn't do well because, oh, Mercury Steam made Lords of Shadow games. Even though you can see DNA for Lords of Shadow, so Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate, within Metroid Dread. So some of the things people like about it, like the parry system, was from Lords of Shadow games. But people don't count it, just act as if Mercury Steam was some sort of plague to be scared about. Same thing also with Silent Hill 2 Remake and Blooper Team, where people didn't really like the title Blooper Team, although one of my friends liked Blooper Team's games, and people were afraid that they're going to ruin Silent Hill 2, constantly doom posting, even making stupid comments of, why is there a combat trailer? Yeah, so is Blooper Team confused too. Guess what, they're with you on that one. Or also the fact of, there was also a showcase of combat in the original Silent Hill 2 as well, but people don't want to mention that, or kind of forgot about it. So just a weird choice, but when the game came out, people liked it, people enjoyed it, and were surprised that Blooper Team made a hit. And now they're making a remake of Silent Hill 1, where sadly people can't recognize the Silent Hill 1 theme apparently. When that got announced, that's a, oh boy, that's a sad thing to see. It's one of those things where people didn't trust Blooper Team, but now they do. And despite Mercury Steam having showcased themselves as being competent developers, people still don't trust them. Dead by Daylight, game that I still play on this channel for some effing reason, is still going to this day. And something developers nowadays constantly note is how many things they wish they could do with the game, but can't because, as I said, the original developers for the game had this whole entire smaller idea and probably didn't make the game with the idea that this would be something going on for years upon years upon years, constantly mentioning the original team, reminding people that the ones making Dead by Daylight now are not exactly the full same company who made Dead by Daylight when it was first a thing, and different mentality and different development idea and methods, which made how the company made the game back then to be something that probably wouldn't last that long, to now having to be this giant amalgamation that's gone on for years and years, is why it gets so buggy, so broken, everything, to the point where people, like myself, get completely frustrated by things just not working. It's because they're constantly trying to shove a square peg into a round hole, but since the game's so popular and beloved that it's only one of its kind that keeps surviving, they keep having to shove it in despite how many things end up breaking in the process, because, well, they want to keep it going, want to keep this idea game going over for the future as far as it can. Some people wish they could just make a new game that can fit the ideas and not constantly break upon itself, but that's kind of a thing where they're like, No, because I feel like it just had to, the issue of the IPs getting them back for a sequel, rebuilding from scratch, all of that. So you can see why, despite the shift in developers and how clearly they're doing some original developers never thought would really work or last as long, they keep trying anyway, even if they keep falling upwards, I swear. A big one is also the Final Fantasy franchise, where many feel like Final Fantasy truly changed after Final Fantasy IX, because Final Fantasy IX, you had 10, which is beloved, but Final Fantasy IX was the last game that had Hironobu Sakaguchi involved in some way, shape, or form. Even though technical, the last Final Fantasy game directed by Sakaguchi was Final Fantasy V. Final Fantasy V is very important to his franchise, I keep saying it, but it's one of those things where it's weird how people don't count that as being where Final Fantasy then shifted, solely when he left the company, and not when he ended up becoming a producer role instead of being a director role. And then comes in with Final Fantasy VII, the compilation and stuff, where Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, people constantly applaud how those games have the original developers, well, some of them, together when it comes to making this whole entire new project. Where it's like, oh, you got Nomura, you got Katase, you got Toriyama, you got Nojima, what could go wrong? Why aren't we clapping? The original developers, that's gonna make this new project everything. This will be a great thing and everything. Let's clap and applaud original developers. But last time I checked, the compilation material, like before Crisis, also had input from Nojima and Nomura. Dirge of Cerberus also has input from Katase as well. So, Crisis Core as well also had input from freaking Nojima and Nomura. So, what exactly are we going on here? Because one of those things where the compilation was something people bashed for years as not liking it, feeling completely unnecessary to Final Fantasy VII for a variety of reasons, which I enjoyed Crisis Core, and for a long time, Crisis Core was my favorite of Final Fantasy VII games. Now, screw it, still my favorite Final Fantasy VII games, but one of the things were, it was divisive when it came out, and to this day, because of some of the new lore stuff they added in, or people just don't like Zack or Genesis, or Dirge of Cerberus, which was just more so disliked, but it does have its fans who still enjoy it, and wanted to get remastered in the same way Crisis Core Reunion did. But it's one of those things where the thing I'm meant to applaud that Symphony Remake and Rebirth have the original developers on board, but at the same time, original developers were also on board with other projects that people didn't like, but I'm supposed to clap this time? I'm supposed to clap? Like, why? Why am I supposed to clap because they're on board now when they have been on board together for other projects that didn't pan out as well, especially since Remake was an idea they had since the whole big era of the compilation, but only could now make their idea a reality. I mentioned earlier in this video how people harp on Mercury Steam because they don't like Castlevania Lords of Shadows. Okay, should we also then harp on Hajime Tabata, Yoshinori Katase, Tetsuya Nomura, Tomo Toriyama because these people had a hand in making the third birthday, which was the third entry to Parasite Eve franchise, and many Parasite Eve fans would prefer never existed because it's only loosely based on the events of previous games, I believe because they lost the rights to the Parasite Eve novels, so they have to basically do the kind of their own thing. But the end result was a game that was just, it has its own fans, everything, but a lot of people just despise this game's existence, especially with the narrative it tries to go for and its big finale twist. It felt like something that was designed to piss off Parasite Eve fans, and these same people that people laud over, but they made Final Fantasy VII. Okay, they also made a third birthday. Should we hold that against them? The answer? No, because sometimes people who make good things also make things that suck. Some people who make things that suck also make the good things. So not as if it's a guaranteed thing that, oh, it's gonna be bad forever. Just don't expect everyone to clap just because certain people on board when they also made stuff that people are like, yeah, you should never have done this, stop that. People still harp on the Final Fantasy 13 series. Should we then doom post about some remake because of that? No, because one, a lot of people also enjoy the Final Fantasy 13 series, and that's great for them. But it also shows that just because there's some things a person maybe didn't like, doesn't mean in the future they can't do something else. Or how many people constantly harp on Tetsuya Nomura because, oh, Kingdom Hearts. One, Kingdom Hearts is awesome. And two, without Toriyama being a creative producer of so many things, there are just so many things that just wouldn't exist. The Dissidia franchise wouldn't exist. Like, yeah, I know people are currently mad because Dissidia Duellum is a mobile title, but without him freaking being a producer for the projects, we wouldn't have Dissidia, period. You wouldn't have the Wardens with You wouldn't have What a Final Fantasy, you wouldn't have Stranger of Paradise, and despite the fact that he's a producer role, so he's not exactly the main person in charge or anything, people treat it as if because he's a big name, he's not the easy target to blame for anything. So people go, oh, Stranger of Paradise is weird, that means Nomura made it because he's a weird person. Like, that's not how that works at all. But another thing, having a person be a big person in a company means they can also have more leeway to get many projects greenlit and get developers to work on it, like Stranger of Paradise being made by Koei Tecmo, specifically Team Ninja, and everything that people greatly enjoy and appreciate. Or Tosei be developers of What a Final Fantasy and everything, and just one of those things where they can find other developers to make these side projects and they work out. I mentioned before how people get wary of new developers or whatever, or what if a IP gets brought back to many years, it looks so different from what it last was. Well, Killer Instinct 2013 was an example where people were just happy Killer Instinct was brought back, period. I remember a friend of mine at the time was talking to me about Killer Instinct, how much he enjoyed it, wish me a new one, and the very next day, no, the very same day, later that day, Killer Instinct 2013 got announced, and I gotta tell him his wish came true. It's one of those things where I didn't see people complain about, oh, Double Helix Games making it, they made Silent Hill Homecoming, that means it's gonna be trashed or whatever. No, people were just happy that Killer Instinct came back, and they got to play it, and they enjoyed it. And then Iron Galaxy was then the main developer for seasons 2 and 3 of the project, and once again, that one is a case of where people are now wary about it, because switching development midway through and be a different company, that's where people started going, okay, I'm not sure about this one. But from what I've seen, people generally also did enjoy seasons 2 and 3 as well, Killer Instinct, so it ended up working out. But when it first got announced, people weren't that worried because they got to see what it looked like and be like, this looks promising. When I had to ship developers again midway through, due to Double Helix, I believe, getting bought out by Amazon, that's when people were then worried about what will happen to the project. We also have Telltale, which eventually Telltale, making, and I want to say pioneering, but revitalizing people's enjoyment of the adventure game genre with their choice-based point-and-click games, eventually ended up shutting down. However, a new company, LCG Entertainment, decided to buy the assets of Telltale and essentially become Telltale. So they're Telltale only in name and not in actual staff people working on it, where many of the former staff not wanting to come back because they felt like the new company in charge should have essentially righted the wrongs of the previous Telltale games, but the company felt like it wasn't their responsibility to do that, with people still waiting for the new Telltale to make The Wolf Among Us 2, but whatever that game is, or will be, or maybe never, because I swear it's in development hell, that game will be different from what the original Wolf Among Us was, especially since even the premise of the new one, based on the trailers we gotten, is apparently different from the premise the original Telltale staff had for a potential sequel to The Wolf Among Us. It's one of those things where, despite having the same name as the company, they're not the same company at all. It's also another practice people think about when companies go on for so long and people just buy up their name or everything. Like Atari. The Atari of today is nowhere near the same as the Atari of 1972, with the current Atari being owned by the French holding company Atari SA, which was formerly named Infogrames, which is nowhere near the same as the Atari 1972, which is not the same as the Atari from 1998-2001, which is not the same Atari from the 90s, we're not the same Atari from the 80s, we're not the same Atari until you got the idea. It's just the name and idea being used, but these are nowhere near the same people. They're just, hey, we got the rights to the company, let's just now become Atari. become as Atari, even if we're a completely different company by this point. See, that's a topic where some companies just have the name and that's about it. The name, and then just go, we're Atari now. Hopefully you'll confuse us for the Atari you enjoyed before. Don't think about it. Don't look up who's actually behind the curtain kind of thing, you know? So when it comes to developers, just one of those things that people generally only pay attention to if it's a series they care about greatly, either doom posting or using original developers coming back as an accolade because they feel like we return to form in that sense. But if it's something you just enjoy and the game's back, you'll just be excited. I wasn't big crazy and going, oh, Visions of Mana is made by Ouka Studio, brand new studio. I was just, Visions of Mana looks cool. I like the Mana series. Played the game. I felt Ouka Studio did a great job of Visions of Mana. And then got screwed over by NetEase to an insane degree. So that whole entire aspect where I want people was like, ooh, new entry in the Mana series? I want it. And I like it. Kind of got people just one new Killer Instinct. And they got it. And they enjoyed it kind of thing. But I just don't like when people start going, this should be an accolade that this or that is being made. It's like, do we need to pull up their failures before you go, that's not the biggest accolade possible kind of thing? Okay, no, it is a big deal to get the original staff involved in something like Final Fantasy VII Remake. But for some reason, it's also a case of like, do I need to bring up the other stuff they made that people didn't like? So don't try and tell me. The issue isn't the idea of them being happy. It's the idea of using that as a shield. Some of the remakes typically has the entire people use made by original devs as a shield. When that shield falls apart, we look at the other stuff they've had a hand in. They're not perfect. No one is. Last thing I'll mention off is also Crystar and Crymachina, where Crymachina is treated as a spiritual successor sort to Crystar because of some developers from the publisher Furyu that do carry over between the projects, like Fuyuki Hayashi, who was a producer and director for Crystar, but also was a producer and handled direction for Crymachina, and was essentially a big person to highlight the similarity between the two games and some of the staff involved, and why people associate Crymachina as a spiritual successor, even if they're made by completely different developers. With Crystar, the main developers being Gem Drops, and for Crymachina, the main developers being Aquaria. So many different developers, there are some key staff that carried over to the projects, make people see the relation between them, if the names Crystar and Crymachina weren't already a big enough indication. So that's all I want to mention. This topic about when developers or companies change, whether it be developers in a company change, or when a series has different developers, and how people tend to react differently depending on who's on board, whether it be doom posting for the project, or using it as some sort of accolade or shield that the project will go off without a hitch, or some people believing that some games just can't work without the original people on helm, which is something people feel for a lot of stuff, that they generally want the person who made the thing to be on board. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are times where you see history have shown that just because someone created something doesn't mean it necessarily have the brightest ideas. Hell, the fact that one of the most popular gaming franchise, Call of Duty, shifts between multiple developers also another thing, where they each have their own different idea for Call of Duty and sub-series and everything. So that's another crazy thing. One of the most popular franchises shifts between developers was something people just kind of accepted for years, even if they have their own preference for which of the Call of Duty developers they like. So I gotta say, alright then, go out there, play games, whether it be a developer you like, or a new developer. Or maybe it's a franchise being brought back by some of the old heads, or maybe it's new younger people working on a new entry to a popular franchise that could breathe new life. A lot of different things that can happen, you know? Alrighty then, good day.